This is Megan.
And this is Steven.
And this is the Synchrony podcast, where we talk about transforming apostolic dating culture and ending loneliness in the church.
Boom.
Boom. I just want to point out to anyone who is watching this on YouTube that I chose the color of my dress before Steven put on his t-shirt.
It's true.
And despite the fact that we're wearing the same color, I was wearing it first. And it wasn't my idea to match.
I also want to point out, it bothers you a lot more than it bothers me.
I do. I'm not a big fan of matching. You know what I think it is? When I was little, my grandma, who's a very talented seamstress, would make these really intense mommy-daughter dresses. Like, this was a big deal in the 90s to go to church. And she would also make my dad a matching tie. And I would have to wear these really itchy socks and these hats with little elastic things that would go under your throat. You probably never had to wear those, but they were big in the 90s for like little girls' clothes. And it was really terrible. And I just have bad memories of matching.
No. I wasn't able to match with my father.
Oh my gosh, Steven. Every time. Anyway.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. All right. I'm super excited about this episode. I think a lot of people are going to be very excited about this episode.
That's right. I just remember what it's about.
You forgot that I forced you to watch a movie yesterday?
I may have repressed it.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to talk about, we're not talking about a movie. We're talking about a book that's been turned into a movie.
Sure.
But before we get to that, really quickly, I just want to, well, actually, should we save announcements for the end?
No, just say it real quick.
Okay. Really quick, I do want to just make an announcement. So if you are looking to attend a singles conference, the DRAW or DRAW conference, which is happening at the International Church of Metro Detroit. So if you are in the Detroit area, this is an amazing conference to go to. It is a singles conference that is happening May 23rd and May 24th.
So pack your bags.
Pack your bags. You can find all the information online. They've got an Instagram if you want to go. That's draw_singles conference. And you can see the information there. But the cool thing about the conference, besides the fact that they have an amazing lineup of speakers, and I think it's just going to be a really powerful time, they also have sync pins available to pass out. So as we talked about last time, we're not doing so much individual shipping of sync pins these days.
Which if you want one, you can still order one.
Yeah, you can still order one. We're just finding that shipping these little pens is more tedious than you would expect.
Yeah, we've had a lot of issues with mail carriers returning them or them not making to the address for whatever reason. And It's been kind of a headache. So
we've just been finding that it's easier to pack, a couple hundred pens into a box and ship it to a conference.
Yeah.
So if you are heading to the Draw conference and you don't have a sync pin and you want one, pick one up while you're there.
Yep.
They're free.
Please do.
Yep. Amazing. Okay. So
you are way too excited about this.
I am. For those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, my undergraduate college experience was a bunch of me not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And I just kind of built myself a major out of all the different things that I enjoyed. So I went to a small honors college and I did a double major in English and Spanish. So English literature, Spanish and Spanish literature, and a minor in anthropology. And I wrote my thesis on a religious studies topic in Spanish because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah, sure.
But I spent a lot of time in college studying literature, and it's something that I love and that I'm really passionate about. And I don't get to talk about it very often, but we're going to talk about it today.
Buckle up.
Yeah. We're talking about Jane Austen.
Yep.
Were you familiar with Jane Austen before we started talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the name, but if you asked me if I've read the books, it definitely wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah, I think that would probably hold true for most guys. I have never heard a man say that their favorite book is Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
I have heard a remarkable number of women say that their favorite book is Pride and Prejudice. So we're going to talk about Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
Yeah, if you are not familiar, Pride and Prejudice is a novel written by Jane Austen. She was a prolific female novelist and author in the late 18th century. So the 1790s was when Pride and Prejudice was first written. And I'm just going to come out and say, like, the punchline to this is Jane Austen hasn't been great for our dating culture. Jane Austen is one of the most important authors of 18th century and 19th century British literature. She is incredibly important. So y'all don't come at me for like getting on to Jane Austen. I don't want anyone to hear this and think like Megan's just a hater that hates Jane Austen. Jane Austen is great. But
yeah.
she's had some impacts on how we as modern day 21st century apostolics are dating that we should unpack a little bit.
Yes. I think we probably should.
Yeah.
Should we name it like, what should we name this episode? Should it be something with like a famous quote from the movie?
Could be.
Or like zooms in on hands?
That's specific to the movie, to the 2005 movie. So for preparation for this, just to give you guys some context, I've read Pride and Prejudice a couple of times. Stephen, I don't think has ever read the book.
Nope.
Yeah. And I did not make you read the book because that would have been painful.
We would have had to take a very long time to record this podcast.
Right. I didn't even make you listen to the audiobook, which would have been slightly less painful.
Yeah, it would have been.
But so to prep Stephen for this episode, we watched the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, we did.
Starring Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden.
Yeah. Last night.
Right. I understand that if you are a woman watching this who is a big Jane Austen fan, you might have big feelings about the 2005 movie versus the, what was it, late 90s or early 2000s BBC miniseries starring Colin Firth. We're not going to fight about which adaptation was better today. We didn't have time to watch the BBC miniseries. And the goal for me was to expose Stephen to the plot line and the characters. And I think the 2005 movie version gets across a lot of the ideas of the novel, and it's been the more popular movie over the last 20 years. So I think a lot of people that are fans of Austen but aren't immersed in the books probably are thinking of that version of
I could definitely
the story.
see that movie being campy.
Yeah, it's like it built a bit of a cult following for sure,
Yeah.
I think. And it's been very popular for a long time. I mean, it's, I was watching it on an airplane like this year. Like it was, and I didn't realize it was like a 20-year-old movie, but they're still showing it on airplanes. So it's done well for itself. Okay. Before we get into the characters and the cast, I need to talk a little bit about the novel.
Okay.
Will you allow me to just nerd out for a moment?
Sure.
I should borrow your glasses for this part so I can push them up my nose in I was kidding. They'll hurt my eyes. Oh, so I can push them up my nose in a philosophical manner. But okay, so let's talk a little bit about Jane Austen.
Okay.
So Jane Austen is a middle-class sort of woman living in the late 1700s in Britain during what's called the Regency period. And quick British history, what's happening during this time, the colonies, the American colonies have secured their independence, right? We've had the Revolutionary War. So Britain has just lost a significant amount of colonial territory in the Americas. The French Revolution is underway when she's writing this novel. So aristocrats are being guillotined and killed. There's been a popular uprising in France that has led to the total upheaval of the nobility system, right, or the social structure in France. And the king at this time in history, this is the time of King George, I think is King George III, who is known as sort of like the Mad King. So he struggles with mental health. He sort of fades into the background, and his son and the queen and a cadre of advisors basically take over the rule of Great Britain, with the king still as a ceremonial figurehead, but sort of shut away from the public eye.
Yeah, sure.
So regents have stepped in to govern, hence the Regency period. It is a very, very complicated and challenging time in European history where the institutions of culture and society are being shaken, right? Remember, we had come through a long period of time where nobility and rulership and monarchy were thought to be divine right given by God.
Yeah.
Right. What the king said, who he appointed, who he gave lands to were, religious sort of in their significance. And that social structure is being upended during this period of history. So Jane Austen is a young woman. It's not common at this period in history for young women to become writers that are well received at the time. She started writing novels. Pride and Prejudice was not the first novel that she wrote. I don't remember which one was. And when she first wrote it, she actually originally wrote it under the title First Impressions, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I literally called it out when we were talking about the plot line. You're like, well, actually, that's called
Yeah,
First
because
Impressions.
their initial meeting is sort of what sets the
Yeah.
tone of their relationship arc, the main characters. And she writes with the support of her male relatives, which is very rare for the time. Her father and brother supported her in her efforts to write. She was educated and sort of homeschooled, but was given the same curriculum and access to literature that her brothers were given, which was very rare for the time. And she was fairly well received as an author in the time that she was writing. Now, she wrote many of her novels under pseudonyms and pen names, so it's not like she was necessarily advertising that she was the writer.
Yeah.
But some of her novels got very popular. I think Persuasion might have been the one that got the most acclaim at the time that she wrote it. But Pride and Prejudice, as it later came to be known, also did well.
Yeah.
So she never made a ton of money off of her work, but she was a popular author in a time when it was incredibly rare for women to write and to gain acclaim for writing. And her work, on the whole, across her novels, there are themes of like dealing with sexism, dealing with patriarchy. There's a lot of discussion of how to navigate this sort of brave new world where like maybe the rules don't really apply anymore the way they used to. And the social contract of marriage and how that social contract was changing in
Yeah.
that time period, where, you know, love marriages and connections seemed maybe more possible than they ever had before for people of a certain status, right? Who prior to that really needed to marry for political and social gain. So that is the space in which she's writing this novel. Social upheaval, you know, upending of all these sort of class structures and social norms. And she writes this book about these two characters, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet. Could you summarize the plot at a very high level?
I wouldn't go as far as saying as a high level, but
I mean, like in broad terms, like it doesn't have
and
to be specific.
and you said Elizabeth Bennet. What, that was her
Mm-hmm.
name? Okay. All right. So Elizabeth Bennet comes from a simple family.
Mm-hmm.
She has 4 or 5 sisters.
4, 5 girls:
Okay.
Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, Lydia, and Jane.
Okay. And but she has no brothers, so it's really I learned through your explanation that was a really important factor of this movie, because a lot of the family livelihood post her, if her father were to die, would really lay the weight on whoever they married.
Right.
And they don't even have to necessarily take care of the family, but hopefully if they married someone with enough wealth, they would.
Right, because you got to think about at this time, you know, she belongs to a family of like, I would say like lower aristocrats,
Yeah.
right? They have some property. They probably own some farmland, a very small estate, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to produce their income. So they're going to be making income off of what that land produces, what the people who there produce, you know, like the people who are working that property produce. And because they don't own a ton of land, their living, right, their sort of annual income is going to be very limited.
Yeah.
They're not tradespeople, so they're not working jobs.
Yeah.
And so her dad is not out like bringing in money. He depends on what his estate can produce.
Yeah.
And his estate doesn't produce much.
Yeah. And also, from from what I gathered, the mother of these 5 girls, her, if you want to call it retirement, her
Mm-hmm.
later years would really determine her level of comfort by who her daughters married.
Right.
And so she, in the movie, had a very overly invested interest on who her daughters married to, or that they even got married at all.
Yeah.
So then Mr. Darcy is this, he I'm trying to be nice, but he's like, from a guy's perspective, he's just full-fledged, like high level functioning autism.
See, I don't
Like
know if we can say that.
he was like, I mean, he has all of the like characteristics of it.
He struggles socially. He's a bit taciturn, you might say.
I don't know what that means.
Taciturn means sort of aloof and kind of holding himself back. And
Aloof is not what I would describe Mr. Darcy.
in the book, he doesn't come across as being full out rude necessarily, the way I think they kind of hype it up in the movies. But yeah.
Okay. Anyways, so he is this guy who shows up, who is a friend of someone who is hosting a ball, and he obviously comes from some level of wealth.
A significant level of wealth.
Yeah, but I mean, from the beginning, at the beginning, you don't really know what level that is.
No, they knew. They knew exactly how much he made. They were talking about it at the original ball.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, like, when they were saying numbers at the beginning, though,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for me to relate it to that period of time.
Yeah, because the numbers don't really matter to us at this point. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of framework around your summary because I think we could get in the weeds a little bit. You've got this family of Bennett sisters who
Yes.
all need to get married in order for their parents and for their families to survive.
Yes, and Mr. Darcy and Mr.
Bingley.
Were the most desirable prospects there.
Right. The two eligible bachelors that come into the area where they live
Yeah.
and become part of the social scene.
Yeah, it was a little bit of like they were pieces of meat in a shark fest.
Yeah. Chum before the sharks.
Yeah.
Meat before the piranhas. A little bit. And you have to understand why, right? Because it's
Sure. It's family, like, livelihoods that are on the line.
Right. So Austen is writing about these women who carry the responsibility of preserving their family livelihood by who they marry.
Yeah.
And this is very much the old idea of this marriage as a social contract, right? Like women who are part of this exchange system where based on the qualities that they have, physical qualities, their social graces, their talents and capabilities, they have to position themselves to be more eligible in order to capture a partner who will economically sustain them.
Yeah.
And so it's very much this trade system of aristocratic women making themselves or their parents making them into excellent prospects. And the Bennett girls at a high level are not excellent prospects. They don't come from a great family. They don't come from money. And their parents have not invested into their artistic and social education to the same degree that other young landed women in their area have been.
Yeah. And they didn't have the, I guess you just said that, but basically they didn't have like the musical training.
The resources for all of that. Yeah. Okay, so we have these characters. We have Elizabeth Bennet, who's one of the Bennet sisters, the second oldest. Jane Bennet, her older sister, who is beautiful, and
She's the blonde.
she's the blonde in this movie.
Well,
Beautiful.
she's the only blonde in the family. So
Yeah.
that's why I said that.
She's stunningly beautiful, very, very kind, a little bit naive,
Yeah.
right? Mr. Bingley, who on
Is
social,
probably my favorite character.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
On social media, if you see like funny like GIFs and stuff, everyone describes Bingley as a golden retriever.
Yes,
So-
I relate with him.
Yeah, the two of you would get along great. He's very bubbly and warm and hospitable and joyful and the life of the party.
Yeah.
And his best friend is Mr. Darcy, who is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
He is socially awkward, difficult to read, sarcastic a little bit, comes across as rude and brusque and cold.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Darcy. I'm going back to the statement I made about where he was. He just has a perfect, like. Did you ever watch the BBC's iteration of Sherlock with
Yeah, with
Benedict Cumberbatch.
yeah.
Like, take the savant level off of it and just Sherlock, and that was Mr. Darcy.
They give the same vibe for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not gonna walk through the entire plot. You can go watch the movie for yourself. It's on Netflix till like the end of the month, and it's fairly clean. So, not a terrible way to spend a couple hours.
Fairly clean. There's nothing dirty about it.
We're gonna come back to that because that's an important thing for why it's had such an influence on our culture.
Yeah.
But basically,
Well, inherently dirty about it.
right. So Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy meet at a social event and have a terrible first interaction. He insults her. She clocks him as being pompous and prideful. And immediately she writes him off. He writes her off. They're automatically at odds socially. They do not make a good first impression, right? Meanwhile, her sister Jane and Mr. Bingley fall in love. They
They're from the very beginning.
Right. So they are taken with each other. They're kind of obsessed with each other.
Well, she is in love with him, but she doesn't know how to express it well.
Right. So she's very interested in him, but it doesn't really come across on her face.
Yeah.
So they continue to sort of move in the same social circles. The Bennett girl's mother makes a spectacle of them, embarrasses them, just basically is ridiculous in public to an extent that makes it very difficult for them to interact socially. And eventually, Elizabeth Bennet comes to hear some rumors about Darcy that convince her that he really is a terrible person.
Yeah.
So for long and short of it, people kind of go their separate ways. Darcy actually expresses an interest in her, and in a very kind of abrupt, socially awkward way, and she rejects him.
Yeah.
Because she thinks all these terrible things.
With
about
all
him.
these preconceived ideas that she's had, and from things that she's heard.
Right, and the experiences that she's had with him. Throughout the rest of the book, what happens is a series of events occurs where Darcy is able to demonstrate his true character. And Elizabeth Bennet is slowly becomes aware that her initial impressions of him were false. And that people that she thought were better people, there's a particular love interest that turns out to be kind of a terrible person in reality, who initially came across much.
You mean her cousin? No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I know who you're talking about.
No, he's another one that's really interesting.
Yeah.
No, but Mr. Wickham, who is this kind of foil character where he comes across at the beginning as really attractive and really wonderful. And then his character is slowly unpacked to be really despicable. And Mr. Darcy, who starts off on the wrong foot, starts to demonstrate through acts of sacrifice and care for other people and compassion that he's actually a person of very high character.
Yeah.
Right.
But to be fair, he was able to do these at pretty easily. They're easy for him to do because of his level of wealth too.
Comparatively,
Yeah.
He was able to do things that nobody else could do because of how wealthy he was.
Yeah.
But he did it with humility. He wasn't looking for notoriety.
Yeah, he wasn't looking for a pat on the back.
Right. And he did things specifically to sacrifice on behalf of Elizabeth's family, not expecting anything in return, but to help them in their social challenges. Right. Long and short of it, they end up falling in love and ending up together. And the story resolves with them sort of riding off into the sunset. Jane marries Mr. Bingley after some challenges with their communication. Elizabeth marries Darcy after both of them realize that they actually really do like each other and they care about each other. It's a lovely story. It's very sweet, right? What did you think about the movie? Just like your impressions as a dude.
The movie, if you're looking for like a romance movie that's clean, I can see why it's such a big hit.
We love Pentecostal women love a bonnet movie, man.
Yeah, like I grew up with my mom watching every single Hallmark movie that she could find. Like, and also in the background, if there wasn't a movie on, she was watching Touched by an Angel.
Yeah.
So like that was my memories of my mom whenever she didn't watch TV very often, but when she did, that's what she looked for.
Yeah.
So this totally fits with some of the movies that my mom would have forced me to watch.
Sure. It's a beautiful film. Like I mean, cinematography is gorgeous, right?
Yeah, for the time.
Yeah. It's set in a lovely location. The
Yeah.
characters are well portrayed. The acting is good, I would argue. Come at me. Um, but
Okay, so from my perspective,
yeah.
it was a guy who really knew what he wanted.
Mm.
And despite him um, being rejected over and over again, he kept on coming back. And he had to keep on like hunting her,
Oh, that's an interesting interpretation.
regardless of how she was treating him. Because he didn't have to prove anything to her. But he wanted her bad enough that he wanted to show his character.
Yeah, so I can see that as part of it, and I could see how people would kind of go for that. I also think though, like in toward the end when they kind of reconcile and he comes back to her to like re-propose. Basically, he proposes twice in this movie. Homegirl gets 3 marriage proposals during the course of this movie, 2 from the
Yeah.
same guy,
Yeah.
and 1 from a really awkward guy that she doesn't like. But anyway,
And her cousin.
yeah, he happens to be her cousin. It was a weird time. So
He reminds me. I don't know why. He reminds me of a Frodo Baggins that like tried to do an audition and didn't make the cut.
I think they really play up his size in this
I
version
know,
of the
but
film.
like I don't know why I was like he could have in another world been a spoof Frodo Baggins.
Sure. We're talking about the Mr. Collins character, if you're
Yeah.
tracking. Okay, anyway, so in his second proposal, Darcy comes back and said, basically, I had lost hope. I assumed you never wanted to have anything to do with me. The last few days have made me feel like there might be hope. So I don't know that he was pursuing her through those acts necessarily, as much as I think a woman would prefer to read it as he cared about her enough to do those things without an expectation. But I can also see the sort of like
Yeah,
prey.
but if you're talking about the times where it was about families merging for commonwealth, and especially at his level, he had nothing to gain except for her and everything to lose.
So
And
that's
she had everything to gain
right.
and everything to lose. So like, and she was still treating him like trash.
Yeah. So let's get into sort of like the subtext of this novel, right?
Yeah.
So Austen, I'm going to talk about like Jane Austen is writing this as a critique of, these practices that have driven social interactions. And I want to point out Jane Austen dies single. She never marries.
Yeah.
She was engaged briefly to a man who she had known growing up. And it was a proposal of convenience. It was very strategic. They didn't necessarily like each other. And she said she realized in a letter to her sister, like the next day, that she'd made a mistake and she broke off the engagement. So she was engaged for maybe 24 hours or less. She had a significant relationship in her past. That was really special to her, but the two of them were economically incompatible. They wouldn't have been able to survive because of his income level and what he did and what she brought to the table. There was no future for them. So they separated and never really built a true relationship despite their interest. So Jane Austen, I think, is critiquing some of the systems that have been the way it has been done up to this point, right? And across her novels.
Yeah.
In this one, she's both critiquing like the sort of the characters of Elizabeth Bennet's mother, who was just like ridiculously obsessed with getting her daughters married off to the highest bidder, and the characters of Mr. Collins, who are all about like upholding propriety and using marriage as like a stepping stone for social benefit, are absolutely made fun of throughout the book.
Oh, sure.
And undermined as kind of like these comedic characters.
And I can see that.
Yeah. And she sort of sets up this whole vision of like, wouldn't it be great if two people could marry because of their mutual respect for each other, despite incompatibility socially, right?
Remind me later to talk about her relationship with her father at the end that I want to come back to.
Okay. So I think that this is an incredibly important book for how we think about social change. But I think that in the modern day, when I say we, I mean mostly women that are like immersed in this sort of fantasy world, have set this up as an aspirational relationship. Like, man, look at this beautiful, pure, because it's a clean book and clean movie, right? It was written at a time where people didn't take their clothes off in books, you know.
Yeah.
Look at this sort of clean relationship that's built on mutual respect and affection. This is the way it should be, right? Like, I think we've kind of idolized this enemies to friends to lovers arc, and this kind of romantic story of when two people put aside all of the social constraints and embrace, their sort of mutual connection based on their mind and based on their interest and that kind of a thing. I think that's a bad idea.
Why?
So even though it is a wholesome story by modern standards, it's still a fantasy,
Yeah.
right? The fantasy is incredibly handsome, wealthy man wanders into small town, becomes enemies with small town girl, and then eventually wins her over, right?
Yeah.
It's still a Hallmark movie
He
plot.
pursues her the whole time.
Right. It's still a Hallmark movie plot, right? For the Jane and Bingley plot too, right? They meet in a crowded dance hall and fall in love immediately. And despite their ups and downs, they never lose their connection. That true love is always there. And they ride off into the sunset, right? It's this whole the plot is made easy because he is rich, and Darcy can kind of smooth things over with his money in ways that wouldn't be reasonable or rational.
Yeah.
And so even though by modern standards it's a clean story and it's a wholesome story, and I do think there are redeeming things about this relationship that we can go into, right?
Yeah, well, sure.
It's still a fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think apostolic women get caught up in it because it seems like a fantasy that it's okay for us to buy into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can still be a little bit harmful if we let that go too far.
Oh, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to take that into a more relatable example for me is I'm going to be talking about a little bit of a controversial topic.
Okay.
When you read fantasy or watch fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be able to understand that it's fantasy and come back to the real world and say, this is how life is.
Right.
And I feel like when it comes to Christian romance, I feel like that gets, because it is absorbed by so many people and it has been so commonly accepted, that has become the norm. Let's take this as an example to a more relatable topic for me, which is video games.
Mm-hmm.
I have played many video games that have to do with fighting and or some sort of first-person shooter,
Mm-hmm.
in which there is an inherent level of, in the game, aggression towards other people, because that's just like the mission of the game. Whether you're acting like some sort of military veteran that's conquering an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But then I come out of the game and I go, oh, I'm in my life. I'm in the real world. I don't have that level of aggression towards things.
Right.
So that sounds like a weird parallel, but for me, like, that's the most relatable context, because that, to me, that's fantasy. That's what fantasy is to me, but I have to leave it there and come back to it and come back to the world.
I would say, would you agree that there are men who don't leave it there very well?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure.
Where that second life can bleed into their daily life.
Yeah.
I think for women it's very much the same. This is the kind of fantasy that women, especially women in church, tend to get trained on.
But this is more socially accepted to be okay to bring it into the world.
Sure, but like I don't want to necessarily debate like the badness or goodness of like books versus video games.
Sure.
Because I think
That's what I'm trying to do.
right, because I think for every person it's different, right?
Yeah.
You really have to listen to the Holy Ghost and understand your own convictions and work out what isn't healthy for you. But I do think that this is a type of fantasy that women are immersed in.
Yeah.
And sort of encouraged to be immersed in, right?
Yeah.
In a way that men are not encouraged to be immersed in video games at a high level by
Sure.
society.
I know that's proving my point.
I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like
I'm like, yeah, although that's what I'm saying.
yes, we are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think that like I know I first read this book in high school, right? It's a part of a curriculum. Like we encourage people to read these classic, sort of classic novels. It's considered something that's healthy for you to do, to be just like a well-read person, right? And this is excellent literature, so it is important to kind of immerse yourself in the story. But I think that by, first of all, making the romance plot line the key aspect of the story, where there is a lot more happening under the surface in the book, right?
Yeah.
The social commentary is there, the political commentary is there, the kind of like, tensions between the old ways of doing things and the sort of the new ways, all these sort of things are present in there. We focus very much on the romance first. And then we immerse ourselves in that fantasy of, the man who is distant and cold, who inside is actually loving and warm and a teddy bear, right? Where are you going?
Could this, and sorry, just the way you said it made me think of something. Growing up, I was surrounded by different churches and different people in different relationships who seemed to be drawn towards people who were not inherently openly loving towards them.
Yes.
They wanted someone who kind of abuse is too aggressive of a word, but it's more of like they wanted them to belittle them or have a little bit of like the bad boy.
Yes.
And so Mr. Darcy was kind of emotionally incompetent.
Yeah.
But it was still him doing that, and she also wasn't turned away by it.
So this is
she was, but she wasn't.
Right. This is a literary and a mythic trope that goes way, way back further, right? If you think about Beauty and the Beast and the stories that was drawn from, which go way back to Greek and Roman myth and Mesopotamian myth, right? About women who find connection with a powerful male that is monstrous in some way.
Yeah.
And then slowly draw his humanity out of him. The werewolf stories were this. Like, there's lots of cultural tropes about this kind of thing, right? Where, a woman who is beautiful enough and good enough and whatever enough can tame the beast.
Yeah.
That idea is so dumb.
It is.
Yeah.
So I'm laughing because there is in my youth group when we were probably 17, 18, 19, 20, I don't remember. Brad, you know how Brad was, or how he is whenever he gets his mind made up on something, he like digs his heels in.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Aaron Robb would argue with the girls that Gaston was not a villain. He was actually a hero.
In Beauty and the Beast?
No,
Yeah,
it's
Beauty and the
Gaston. It's
Beast, yeah.
Gaston. Yeah,
Gaston.
and so he was basically. So it was just reminded me of the whole argument, and they would get so hot about it.
Sure, but there is this idea in literature and history and in the world that like a man can be gruff and rough, and a woman can sort of bring his softness out of him.
Yeah.
Which is a lie that women tell ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
That inside every super sarcastic or kind of cold and distant man is a warm and squishy center, that if we are just beautiful enough and good enough and kind enough and sweet enough and nowadays sexual enough and attractive enough and all those things, we can be the ones to bring that out of him.
Yeah.
And that usually doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm not trying to paint all guys with a
no,
in a poor
but
light.
it's true though.
Mm-hmm.
Like You should be able to find someone who loves you who is loving and
Right.
gentle and kind from the beginning, and you just shouldn't have to try to change him to be there.
So here's the thing, though. I think this trope has gotten so prevalent in our society that a man who approaches a woman and genuinely shows up with,
Like biblical masculinity.
yeah, genuinely shows up with sweetness and gentleness is going to be kind of seen.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
They draw the short straw.
Yeah. So there's this whole idea that, like,
I know.
oh my
I
gosh,
was a nice guy.
you did fine. And so it,
I did great.
but yeah, so like that same idea though, that like if a guy is too nice and too sweet, he's not worth your time.
Yeah.
So it's this, and this could be said, the same thing is true for like Jane Eyre, which is actually my favorite Bonnet novel, if I have to go to it. Like you've got this rough, cold, sort of emotionally stunted man, and this woman has to sort of bring this out of him. So women have adopted that, right? I think the bad boy trope is part of that. There's this attractiveness to a man who can be transformed by the love of a woman. It's in country music. It's in,
Oh, sure.
it's
But
everywhere.
the thing is it's funny because the things that ruin marriages
Mm-hmm.
is a woman that feels like they have to mother their husband,
100%.
right?
And that they have to be
what
the
is this whole entire trope with Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy is she is basically having to show him how to use his emotions and understand his emotions.
kind of. She's
Well, I'm
also,
saying,
yeah,
I mean, she's also a little emotionally incompetent in some ways
right.
too, but like that's just a little bit of ignorance, just not having a relationship before. But like,
Yeah.
but this still is the same thing. He is emotionally dumb, and she basically says like, no, like
Yeah.
this is how it should be, and that's when those questions come up, and he goes, oh, maybe you're right, and then he likes her more and more and more.
And the idea that he likes her because she is spicy, and because
Yeah.
she's not kind to him either, and he finds that kind of attractive.
Yeah.
And I know women who their way of flirting with guys is dissing them. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
sure.
And they think that works. Like their way of like demonstrating attraction to guys is like putting them down, which is so, but that's part of this
Yeah.
trope of like, if we want to go from the enemies to lovers.
Yeah, and I can
track.
understand the level of playfulness there. Like that, there is
Right.
a period of that is fun,
Sure.
but that should not be your whole
Basis of your
basis of
relationship.
communication.
So yeah, so there's this idea that we've got this dark brooding man, and the woman's going to step in and like change him, right? And there's even a line in the movie. I don't know if this was actually in the book. I don't think it was, but I could be wrong. In the movie, when he comes back for the second proposal, he says, "You have bewitched me, body and soul," right? And it's this idea that
I do have to say, when he said that, I was like, that was good.
it sells, right?
Yeah.
It helps that he's standing in a dewy field in a morning with the sun behind him in a pirate
sure.
shirt. Yeah. Pirate shirt just being
A really
yeah.
deep V-neck.
Yeah, exactly. So, but
Scandalous.
scandalous. But that idea that like women can, it's a power dynamic, right? That with love and attractiveness and spirit, women can tame an untamable man.
Yeah.
Right. The reason why Mr. Darcy was such an eligible suitor is that despite all of his money and all of his connections, he had not been taken by anyone. He had not found anyone he wanted. He was the untamable man. Right. And the heroine of the story is the unique woman who is intelligent and powerful and spicy, who wins him over.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about how this story, as wholesome and lovely as it is, has some unhealthy perceptions that kind of build into our understanding of how relationships work.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the communication factor in this movie.
Okay.
What were your perceptions of the communication between Bennet and Darcy, or between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy as they developed their relationship?
It was miserable.
100%.
It was a bunch of stated expectations and
Subtle signals.
subtle signals. There was no communication whatsoever. And then it was a bunch of like hearing from other people about the person and then making snap judgments about that person and then waiting for that person to somehow mysteriously, Mr. Darcy or Elizabeth, to mysteriously like have the answer to know how to solve the problem without either of them ever talking to each other.
Let's talk about the hand scene.
Very weird film, like videography. Like it was very stupid.
So what we're talking about, when I said the hand scene, every woman who's seen this movie knows what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
And then the moment I saw that, and I immediately was like, I'm sure there's fan fiction about it somewhere.
Yeah. So the scene is, this is when Elizabeth, this is the first time that you see Elizabeth Bennet sort of demonstrate some level of interest or intrigue in Darcy, kind of in the movie, that is sort of like of an attraction, but it has to do with him giving her his hand to help her into a carriage, and then
The camera pans down to his hand
as he's walking away,
as he's walking away. He does this
hand flex
hand
thing,
flex gesture,
like the thing you would do if you were
that
like,
does not add to the movie whatsoever, without it just being sheer uh spectator.
they're trying to communicate sexual tension, and like,
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't add to it.
I sure, I mean, I think
Sorry, a spectator imagination is where I was going.
sure,
Like they want you to look into that gesture.
yeah, yeah, but they're trying to also demonstrate things that in the book would be narrated in someone's thoughts, right?
That's fair.
So I get that, but my point is like, this
All right.
single,
For a dude watching this, that hand gesture adds nothing.
sure, but for women watching it, they're
Yeah.
like, oh, look at these, we're like, look at these subtle signals that he's using to communicate, and this means this thing. There's all these little moments of signaling that women are like, oh, look, these subtle moments where he helps her into a carriage, or where his eyes dart over here and she looks this way, and whatever, that we are trained to recognize as signs of attraction and affection and whatever.
But in real life relationships, one, you're not noticing those signals if there are any signals.
And dudes
And
aren't
two,
using them.
Well, that too. And two, there's not music playing in the background while it's happening.
Right. Yeah. The sunbeam isn't falling
Yeah.
perfectly across anybody's face. But also, like,
And I don't wear pirate shirts.
right.
Maybe I should.
Maybe you should. This got weird. Like, my point is, like, women, it's contributing to this idea that there's this unspoken code of how attraction is demonstrated.
Yeah.
That women are trained on, right? The idea that there is a massive amount of fan fiction around this one weird hand gesture in this movie,
Yeah.
is symptomatic of that, where women fixate on these small signals that are supposed to tell us something about what's going on inside this person's mind. And men, I argue, do not get that script. Like, that is not.
No, they're actually just like picking their nose.
Don't come at the guys that they're picking.
No, I am one of the guys. Like the moment you walk away, like while you're dating, and you spend a whole afternoon. There might be a few moments of like reminiscing about the day, and then like for me, I would have a period of like my brain going beep and like flatlining, not like having weird hand gesture moments.
Yeah, no. So my point here is that I think because women, this has been such a thing that women have gravitated to, it contributes to this unhealthy idea of looking for all the subtle signals and trying to overanalyze every tiny gesture.
Yeah.
When guys do not, they were never taught that code.
Okay, then what happens to those women who have those expectations and there are no tiny signals?
There's the sense that nobody's pursuing them. Nobody's interested. So this is something that comes up quite frequently, where I'll talk to women who are dating later in life, right? They haven't had much dating experience, and they'll say, well, because he never said that he wanted to call me, or because he didn't sit by me when there was a chair there, or because he didn't like hold the door open for me or anything.
And what we've heard a lot is because he hasn't pursued me, or the man has to be the one to pursue me.
Right. And all of those things are what she's expecting him to do to demonstrate pursuit. There's the sense of no one's ever expressed interest in me. When in fact, there might have been people who were interested, but she's over here, I'm stereotyping. This is not the case for every woman who's been in this situation, but there might be a woman who's over here basically just waiting for Mr. Darcy to approach her, right? And say something abrupt and romantic or abrupt and whatever. You've bewitched me body and soul, right?
Yeah. And first of all, we don't have British accents.
Right. But like he doesn't do that. And so in her mind, that's a rejection.
Yeah.
When in fact, it's just the fact that she's looking for signals that he doesn't know he's supposed to be giving. And he's looking for signals that she's not giving. Right.
Yeah.
We've talked about before how, men generally, scientifically, there's data to demonstrate that men tend to approach women only after they've received some sort of invitation via body language or speech that tells them that she feels safe for him to approach.
Yep.
Right. So I think this type of material, this type of media, and I'm not just talking about the novel written by Jane Austen. I'm talking about all the modern adaptations of it and the culture around it and the sensationalization of it, right? Sensationalizing. It's too late for me to come up with big words.
Drink your coffee.
Yeah. Because of all of the ways this has been blown up, it's created more of this heightened expectations from women of how men should act and behave in social settings around them. And it's put men at more of a disadvantage, I think, in those spaces because they are not trained on the same script and set of expectations. So people just continue to speak two different languages past each other.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think there's more to unpack about things about this book and this movie and the other, adaptations of it that have kind of been unhealthy for our culture. Was there anything redeeming about the relationships that you saw in the movie that you were like, that actually is kind of a healthy thing? Just to give it, to play devil's advocate.
I mean, what was his name? Buckley, Bentley, Buick,
Bingley.
Okay. Did I just move the camera? I don't know if I just moved the camera.
It's okay.
Bingley. The only thing that I saw that was like remotely realistic was when he was pacing back and forth with Mr. Darcy because he was realizing how much of an idiot he was
for talking to Jane,
for leaving and not talking to her. And so I can relate with it because it's like super, like I can't sit still when I'm talking about something serious. So he's going back and forth trying to like rehearse what he wants to say to her.
Right.
He then goes to her, completely flops, leaves, and then comes back and realizes he's like, basically, I have been a complete idiot.
And he's just brutally honest.
Yeah, he's like, I've been a complete idiot, and I really want you, and I want to marry you. And she still has no idea how to communicate her emotions either.
Jane, right?
Yeah, Jane, and they end up getting married. But that was probably the most like what would be real to how a conversation could go when you have made a mistake or misjudged a situation, and then you come back and you are brutally honest in a loving way, and he confessed his love for her. Great, cool.
Yeah.
I don't think I saw anything about the Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy relationship that was realistic.
So,
and that might be me being harsh.
Realistic, I think, is too generous, but some positive things you can take from it if you're going to immerse yourself in this movie anyway or in these books. A couple of things that I think aren't unhealthy, right? Number one, there's the idea that first impressions aren't the full picture.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And I think that's a good thing to recognize. There's a character
that is a good example.
Right.
Yeah.
So like there's this character of Wickham who comes across great. He's very attractive at the beginning. He ends up being a terrible person. Darcy comes across poorly in the beginning. After he's given more chances, his true character shines. First impressions don't always tell the whole story.
Yeah.
You might not be immediately attracted to someone, and they could still be someone who's a good fit for you ultimately.
That's fair. And it took them building chemistry, if you want to call it that, for them to recognize that they did want to be with each other.
I think it's trust. They had to learn to trust each other.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good takeaway. Another thing I really like about the way that this movie in particular depicts this society is it places a heavy emphasis on the close relationships between women and between men. So Darcy and Bingley have a relationship where Darcy can go to Bingley as his friend and say, you shouldn't marry this girl. Or, hey man, I was really wrong. I told you not to marry this girl. And actually, I think she's great.
Yeah.
And that kind of open communication between men is okay. They
Yeah.
have a strong male relationship. Similarly, Elizabeth has really close friends in the form of Charlotte Lucas, later Charlotte Collins, and her sisters, right? Where they have this kind of transparency and they can lean on each other emotionally. I think that we lack that in our dating culture oftentimes, especially for men. And I think it's really important to have other people in your circle who are lending their own perceptions.
Yeah. And it being constructive,
Right.
not being, because a lot of times we do have that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more of sarcastic one-liners that
Tearing people down or making
or
them
tearing
feel
people
bad.
down, or not even just tearing people down, but like glancing past matters, right? Or going with
Right.
stereotypes of like, oh, women being women, like instead
Mm-hmm.
of actually having a real conversation about it.
Right.
I've had it in times past where it just like to avoid having a real authentic conversation,
Mm-hmm.
they make jokes and just keep on going and
Right.
just kind of like, well, if the engine light goes away, the problem went away.
Right.
Not really.
Yeah. So I think that's true. I think that there are, points that are interesting of like social status and class should not be the key factor in considering compatibility, right?
Yeah.
There are practical concerns that I think are really important to consider when you're looking for a partner, but the idea that it doesn't have to be the social trappings that make someone a good partner for you.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
The there is this idea that you marry a family, right?
Yeah.
For better or for
I
worse.
remember one of the things he said is like your mother and your sisters are overly invested or
Yeah,
something. Like
no,
he's
yeah,
basically
basically
like,
the impropriety of your mother and your sisters.
yeah,
And the thing about it is his family is also a little dysfunctional because he's got his crazy aunt,
yeah, that aunt, yeah,
who is trying to, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who's trying to like, you know,
arrange a marriage.
push him into a marriage and is really rude and all this different stuff. So both of them have these difficult relatives that play into the dynamic, right? And it's like we have to accept these people for who they are and decide that we're going to build a life that we want to build. And I think that is true to life to a degree,
Yeah.
right? You marry a family, but you have to make decisions about how you move forward as a couple. So
I do want to follow up with her relationship with her father, and I think that was kind of unrealistic for the times.
oh yeah, wait. Well, say what you want to say first.
So even though I think obviously I think men loved their daughters, but
Sure.
the way that men viewed women back then was very different than today.
Mm.
And he made a statement to me that was just over dramatized
Mm-hmm.
for the time. And he basically said something along the lines of like, if it was anyone but Mr. Darcy, I wouldn't have like let you marry him or something like that. Something along those lines of like,
Yeah.
no one would have been good enough for you except for Mr. Darcy after he had learned about Mr. Darcy.
Right.
Like, and who he truly was. And I was like, that was just a little over dramatized for me.
And I think that's played up in the movies. In the book, you can tell that Elizabeth and her father have this connection, right?
Is she the oldest or no?
She's the second oldest.
Second oldest,
Jane is the
okay.
oldest.
I was like, I can understand that more if she was the oldest, but
No, and it's interesting because it might be sort of an allegory for the relationship between Jane Austen and her father. They were close, and he was supportive of her. He did support her education. He exposed her to a lot of literature. He himself was a very kind of simple man. He was a clergyman and like just, a down to earth
and
father
he knew
figure.
his wife was crazy.
Mr. Bennett did?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was talking about Jane Austen's dad, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so in some ways I think that she paints him as a very positive character, but in the book he's not quite as ambivalent about the whole marriage concept in the way that he is. Like he's sort of a social disruptor in the movies where he's like, I don't care who you marry, don't marry this guy, whatever. Like in the
Yeah.
books he's more like, do what your mom says, So I think that I think that there's an interesting dynamic there. My takeaway here is Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen's novels, excellent literature. It's certainly not the worst thing you could read, right?
Sure.
If you're looking to immerse yourself in a beautiful story. It has some real depth to it. It has some great social commentary. It's an incredible, artifact of our literary history. It's worth your time to read, but it shouldn't be the template that you're using to build a fantasy about what a future relationship could look like.
It's going back to what we talk about all the time
Mm.
now, that we shouldn't just marry like an apostolic, but we should also date like an apostolic.
Right.
But we don't have a template for what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've just taken clean romance
Mm-hmm.
and have just used that as a copy and paste for what we should look for,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just the world adjacent dating.
Yeah, and we don't really see this enemies to lovers arc in scripture in terms of couples there.
I'm just trying to think. There's lovers to enemies. Delilah.
Sure. Yeah.
But
We don't really see characters where they dislike each other deeply, and then eventually, if anything, it's usually there's marriages of convenience and purpose,
yeah.
right? Or there are marriages that are, connections that form out of love.
I don't know. I'm sure out of David and Solomon, I'm sure some of them started off enemies out of one of their 1,000 wives.
I don't know. I don't think you're allowed to be enemies with the king, and still stay in the
Playful
harem.
enemies?
Yeah, I don't think that's how it works. Anyway, so I think this is just a trope.
There's room for interpretation.
Right. Because we think of these stories, these Regency novels in particular, as being, or like even like getting later into like, early 19th century work and whatever in the British canon, we think about this as being a very clean time of history and a very like, wholesome type of story. And it is compared to the stuff that you can pick up nowadays,
Sure.
right? It's still not holy
Yeah.
in its representation of marriage, right? It's not a bad,
or marriage, or how to find a wife or a husband.
and how to build a strong relationship.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is like, so the culture of the time, even though the dating culture was very different, wasn't less human and broken than what we have now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Women being treated like, chattel for trade is not any less problematic than our current sort of complex dating culture and issues, right? It's just different. And it's a fantasy that we can escape into because of how different and it is to sort of what we experience now. We should treat it with caution.
Yeah.
So I think my takeaway to mostly the ladies, who I imagine are the ones who have been mostly immersed in this, is don't put it on a pedestal. Enjoy it for what it is, which is a great moment of our literary history, a beautiful story, a well-written work, and leave it at that.
Yeah. And then I think another thing I would challenge is that if some of the things that we've talked about in this
Mm-hmm.
has resonated with you on things that you might be looking for in a husband or a wife, like the body language expectation, the approach, the acts of service without communication, like challenge where you got those from, because that could be part of the reason why you haven't been able to find someone, is because your expectations might be too high, or not as realistic.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to come across as that you're the problem, but I think there's always something that we could be working on.
Yeah, I think it's good to critically analyze what signals you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And understand that there could be a connection that does not look like it came out of a Regency novel,
Yeah.
that doesn't start off, it doesn't start off as enemies to lovers, doesn't start off as Bingley and Jane romantically being swept off your feet. That could still be good, right? It doesn't have to have this kind of, complex, dramatic fairy tale component to it to be a relationship of worth and value.
Yeah.
And I think we've placed a lot of value on these things that we shouldn't be,
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me make you watch a Bonnet movie with me.
You're welcome. No, it was fine.
Yeah.
I've definitely, at least the acting was halfway decent compared to some of those Hallmark movies I've had my mom force me to watch as a kid.
Hallmark has, yeah, they quantity over quality sometimes over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I hope this didn't ruffle too many feathers.
I bet I made a lot of statements about Pride and Prejudice that probably got people up in arms, but
Yeah. And if you haven't read the book, like, go read the book. It's worth it. I will say too, I'm going to caveat all of this. I love literature. I'm not an Austen scholar by any stretch. And there's people who are way, way more into Jane Austen and all the history and stuff than I am. So if you have insight into this, if you have resources that you want to call out, if you just love Jane Austen as a work and you want to talk about it, feel free to make comments. It's a great conversation to have, right?
Or if you completely disagree with everything we said, go
Yeah.
ahead and comment that too.
If you feel like our interpretation is just blatantly wrong, we can handle
We
it.
can have a conversation.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hey.
I love you. And happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
And happy Mother's Day.
Thank you. Yes, you are lucky or unlucky in that my birthday and Mother's Day always usually fall in the same week. It's kind of a twofer.
I kind of feel it's the same way as people who have birthdays around Christmas, especially as kids. I feel bad that you don't get to separate like individual time and dedication to you that you deserve. I mean, one could say that I could just separate and do another one later and down the road.
It's a lot.
But that being said, like, it is nice to get it out of the way all at one fell swoop.
It's fine with me. I like to just kind of knock it all out, so it works out.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you. Before we run away, I do want to just mention we do have our sale coming up, summer flash sale.
That's right.
On Memorial Weekend. So
40% off?
40% off on our matchmaking service. So if you are interested in working with an apostolic matchmaker and you do not plan to go dance in a ballroom and bump into a dark and handsome stranger and go through a lot of drama and want to find someone a different way, we would love to work with you to help you do that.
Yep.
And we'll make it much clearer than it was for Jane and Darcy. Elizabeth and Darcy.
That's right.
So if you want to work with us, now's a great time to get involved.
It's a different version of the book.
It's different. Yeah. It's the rewrite. There have been so many rewrites of that book, like from different perspectives and like, oh my gosh, it's like a whole thing. I can't. If you would like to work with us, that's a great time to get started. So keep an eye out for that information. We'll have it up over Memorial Weekend. It's the Friday through the Monday is when the sale will run.
Sounds good.
I love you.
Love you too.
You guys have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.